Good morning, and thanks for joining us again today. We do host a Zoom conversation every Sunday at 4 Central Time. So if you would like to join us to talk about this very controversial topic that I'm talking about today, please do. I host a couple of other more casual conversations, just helping all of our viewers and our seated members in Springfield to connect with each other on Wednesdays. That's at 9 a.m. For our coffee conversation and 5 p.m. for our happy hour conversation. For those of you that would like to join us, you'll find those links posted on any of our places where you get this video from. We've talked a lot about racism in America over the past several years, and it's a huge issue, it's very complex, and it defies any simple explanations or simple solutions. But in the past few years, a lot of that conversation about race has revolved around the issue of police violence and the way in which it is almost universally ignored in our judicial system. The hashtag Black Lives Matter movement came into existence in 2013, following the acquittal of George Zimmerman for killing Trayvon Martin in Florida. The Trayvon Martin was one of the first that was so well documented and covered in the media. And they gave it a lot of attention for a long time because it was just a teenage boy that had left his dad and his girlfriend at the girlfriend's house. He went to a convenience store, got a bottle of tea and a bag of Skittles. And George Zimmerman confronted him, and in the confrontation, this wannabe cop ends up shooting him dead. It seemed like such a clear case of racial profiling and overly zealous neighborhood patrolling that literally turned into an entirely unnecessary murder. But he was acquitted of charges. And I think a lot of white America woke up in 2013 to how serious this problem really is. It was the very next summer when things took an even more ugly turn in the police killing of Michael Brown, a black teenager in Ferguson, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. Riots broke out over that. There was looting, there were buildings burning, there was an entire summer of violence demanding change. And yet the officer involved, Darren Wilson, it took 6 full years for all of the legal wrangling to come up with the decision of the grand jury not to even press charges against this policeman who shot an unarmed black man. So we have two issues to think about here. Over the past 5 years, police have shot and killed 135 unarmed black men. As of today, I didn't watch the news this morning, it's hard to stay current on these things. Police shoot and kill black people, on average by ratio of race, twice as often as they shoot and kill white people. And in some cities, that ratio is much higher. Now, last year, police in the United States shot and killed more than 1,000 people. But the second issue has to do with the judicial system, which seems always willing to give the police the benefit of the doubt. Even when, and in this George Floyd trial that's gone on for 2 weeks, there's video evidence, there's police cameras, there's multiple witnesses, and then heaven knows how much the prosecution has spent on expert witnesses when there is so much evidence, and yet this weekend, we are not sure what the verdict is going to be, even with just a preponderance of evidence. We're never sure that our judicial system will find a member of the police force guilty of anything. Now, there has been progress on some fronts. Many of us were very encouraged last November when one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter protests in Ferguson, Cori Bush, who is a single mother from St. Louis, was elected to Congress. She's the first black woman elected to Congress from Missouri. It seems almost unbelievable to say that out loud, but she was the first. And she brings with her not only her training as a registered nurse, and as a UCC minister, but she's also experienced homelessness. She lost her job after a difficult pregnancy. She was a nurse, and she and her then husband and baby ended up living in their car for quite a while. So she's bringing a tremendous amount of experience with what it's like to be a black woman in Missouri to Congress. Then a couple of weeks ago, when the news was really not paying much attention, St. Louis broke another glass ceiling by electing Tashura Jones as mayor. And she came into office promising that race would no longer be an afterthought in St. Louis government and policing. And as I was reading a news story about this, it was almost a throwaway line that the journalist offered to just acknowledge that in the 1,500-member police force in St. Louis, that there are two police unions, one for white police officers and one for black police officers. This is so implausible in 2021 that I feel like I need to say it again. In St. Louis, there are two unions representing the police force, one for black officers and one for white officers. Now, this is not the 1960s when I started school in a segregated all-white school in rural Kentucky. This is not a museum piece of photographs of coloreds only and whites only signs outside of restrooms or by water fountains. This is right now in St. Louis, Missouri, one of our country's major cities. Of course, it would be impossible to maintain this segregation if black members of the St. Louis police force now wanted to join the white police union. It started out as a matter of necessity. It's just never gone away because black members of the police force are painfully aware of the deep racism that exists among the white members of the police. A perfect illustration of their very rational distrust can be seen in the case of Detective Luther Hall, seen here working undercover during a demonstration in 2017. 3 white officers, mistaking Detective Hall for a demonstrator, knocked him to the ground and beat him so severely that he was hospitalized, where he underwent several surgeries to recover from the incident. And last month, after 3 years of political wrangling, the people who beat him, the 3 white officers who beat him so severely, were acquitted of all charges by an all-white jury. You don't have to know a lot about St. Louis to wonder, how do you get an all-white jury in St. Louis? Folks, this is no longer something that we can wave off as being either media hype or exaggerated claims of police abuse by the black community. It's just true. Black people don't fare well in encounters with the police, whether they're guilty or innocent, whether they fully cooperate when they're being arrested or whether they resist arrest. Even when they're asleep in their bed in their own home, they don't fare well. And as in Detective Hall's case, even when you are a member of the police force, at work, you don't fare well. Thursday, the police in Chicago shot and killed 13-year-old Adam Toledo as he surrendered to the police. They told him to drop the gun he was carrying, to stop and raise his hands, which he did. And with his empty hands raised, they shot him right in the chest and killed him. 13 13. He didn't even get to go to high school. He didn't go to prom. He never had a girlfriend. Nothing. 13. And obeying police orders was shot anyway. And after these egregious events, the judicial system makes it all that much worse when they immediately began to try to say that they were following police procedures. Allegations of racism in the Minneapolis Police Department, where some estimates say that a black man is 7 times more likely to be shot by the police than a white person is. These have been stories that are regularly appearing in the news, from the shooting of Philando Castile in 2016 to the choking death of George Floyd last year, and now this week in the shooting of Daunte Wright, in yet another traffic stop gone bad. At this moment, we're still awaiting the verdict in the trial of former Minneapolis officer Derek Chauvin in the choking death of George Floyd. But while demonstrations have been going on every night of the 2-week trial demanding justice for George Floyd, police officers were so unaware that they added to this tension by pulling over this 20-year-old driver, Daunte Wright, and ended up shooting him to death. Now, Kim Potter, who has been on the police force longer than Daunte Wright has been alive, Potter resigned, but now she's been charged with involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter, she claims, because she thought she was holding her taser when in fact she was holding her police revolver. Maybe you could be that confused when you're that excited. She insists that the fatal shooting of Daunte Wright was an accident, but something which, and folks, I can't even believe that I am saying this in public, but televangelist Pat Robertson finds Kim's story to be unbelievable. Folks, Pat Robertson has shown us for 40 years that he will believe almost anything. He'll say almost anything. But he literally went on TV, as you see here, holding a yellow plastic taser and a police revolver and saying, this is too much for even him to believe that she could have confused these two. Now, I don't know Kim Potter. I don't know if she's a racist. And for our purposes today, it doesn't really matter. I don't want us to think about this problem anecdotally. It's not a matter of psychoanalyzing Derek Chauvin or Kim Potter, because the real issue, we've got to be able to draw back the wide-angle lens and just look at how racism is an institutional part of our police force in the United States. It's an institutional part of our judicial system, and unfortunately, it is a big part of our military, and many members of the military retire and go back home and join the police force. And I want to think about why our judicial system seems to so blatantly favor the police, even when there is so much video evidence and multiple witnesses of inexcusable and lethal crimes being committed by the police. As arrests have mounted, it's now 100 days since the insurrection at the Capitol. And we're discovering, as they've arrested now between 450 and 500 people, that a large number of the people they are arresting for the worst parts of that insurrection were active members of police forces or active members of military. There were thousands of people involved, and they've only arrested fewer than 500, but 20% of them have a background in police or military. And that would seem like that would just be impossible. You just couldn't even consider it, except for the fact that that insurrection was primarily motivated by racism. And racism runs deep in the police force and in the military. I don't want to tar the whole of the United States Armed Forces and all of America's police forces with a single brush, because it's obviously not all of them. And it's even obviously not the majority of them. But it is obvious that it's too many of them, and we've been ignoring it for generations, and that's what I'm saying has to stop. The nomenclature is not new because marginalized communities have been talking about either defunding or dismantling the police for a long time. It's a new term for a lot of us. It appears to be new to the media, at least, and a lot of Democratic leadership don't like it. They say they make us lose elections, as if allowing black people to be shot by the police doesn't make us lose elections. I don't know. I cannot see inside the thickness of their skulls to understand their objection. But I recognize that many of us who do like the term and who use it, that we don't use it in the same ways. We don't always mean the same thing. So speaking only for myself, when I say defund the police, what I am talking about is a dramatic reform of police budgeting. And I'm going to pretend that someone actually asked me how I would go about rooting out racism from the police and the military. Let's just pretend that you all really want to know what I think about how to get rid of white privilege and white police favoritism in the judicial system. Number one, let's just wonder, why are there more than 1,000 police killings in the United States every year when in a country like Great Britain, there's either none or 2 or 3, never more than 7, an average of 2 a year over the long haul, when you know Great Britain, if you've ever been there, has every bit as much racial diversity and immigration as the United States does, and they have as much racism as the United States does. Now, I think there's a number of reasons why their police killings are so few. The first of which, the streets of Great Britain are not awash with guns. Go figure. The more guns there are, the more people get shot. Guns are closely regulated in the United Kingdom, so the police are not always scared to death every time they step out on a sidewalk or get out of their car or try to apprehend a suspect. We have allowed our streets to become militarized for no reason other than the profit of gun manufacturers. That's the only reason we do it. And then we taxpayers spend billions of dollars on hiring more police and arming them as if they were going out onto the streets of Fallujah in the middle of a military battle zone. And then when they go there, the police seem always to be scared. As we saw Thursday night, there are military-style weapons readily available on our streets, such that this incident in Indianapolis Thursday night, a totally untrained, inexperienced 19-year-old was able to buy a military-style rifle, go to the place where he used to work, jumped out of his car, and in a minute, killed 8 people and wounded 4 others, and then took his own life. In a minute. Guns like that should not be available to the general public and should be sparingly issued to people on a battlefield. Police are always pulling out their handguns because they say they feared for their lives every time the police shoot someone. And then it turns out that they're unarmed. They always say they were scared. Now, I'm not saying that being a policeman or being a woman on a police force is not dangerous. I am saying that it's not the most dangerous job in the world. It is, just for example, much less dangerous than being a logger, than being an airplane pilot, than being an airplane mechanic, being an oil derrick worker, being a road maintenance worker, an agricultural worker, a roofer, a garbage collector, a firefighter, a pizza delivery guy, a utility lineman, a crane operator, a landscape supervisor, a farmer, a construction worker, a vehicle mechanic, or a groundskeeper. I'm not saying that they don't face danger, but statistically, this is true. The police kill 10 times as many people as there are police who get killed. So, If people like Kim Potter have been on the police force for more than 20 years and she's still so scared that she can't tell the difference between a plastic taser and a police revolver, then maybe this is not the job for her. And someone should have figured that out a long time ago. Another reason there are almost no police killings in Great Britain is that there are also almost no traffic stops. And traffic stops appears to be one of the places where our police get into trouble the most often. In Great Britain, they use cameras on their major highways, and if you're speeding or if you're driving erratically or badly, then you will get a ticket in the mail, and fines are not the only thing that can happen to you as a result of being caught on their cameras. Our police use broken tail lights or expired tags as a pretense to try to search drivers to see if they can find them guilty of other more serious crimes, which in just 2 words is over-policing. It's just too much that they're constantly trying to catch a driver with drugs or illegal weapons or intoxicated or something when a camera could do it. So in sum, we in America simply must demilitarize our streets, which means outlawing semi-automatic rifles and lowering the number of rounds of bullets that can be held in a gun. Guns can be legitimately owned in the United States for target practice, for home protection, or for hunting. These military-style weapons have no business on the streets where we expect police to go out and have to apprehend criminals. And secondly, we've just got to start using cameras instead of armed police to manage our traffic issues. That was just one point. Secondly, there should be much better screening of candidates for both police and military service. And once they've been screened, their consistent training needs to regularly increase their understanding and their sensitizing to issues of racism, because people sometimes get radicalized in the military, or they get radicalized on the police force. Now, I'll just tell you existentially, when I'm teaching for Drury University, every 2 years, I have to take boundary training classes that take hours. If you want to be an adjunct professor, you've got to constantly be sensitized to what your boundaries are with your students. And really, you could draw down the whole of all of these courses to a single sentence. Do not have sex with your students. How often should I have to take that class? I feel like this is obvious. My counseling professor at Vanderbilt had a much more graphic and therefore intensely more memorable way of saying it, but that is something even I can't say here, which, given what I've said, that you have to understand, she had a very graphic way of making us understand you don't have sex with your counseling clients, your church members, or your students. Now, back in the 70s, a professor having sex with students was why most of the professors we knew a generation ago were married to someone 20 or 30 years younger than them. It was considered almost like an employment benefit. But it became frowned on in the 80s, and then after the Clarence Thomas hearings, it became cause for dismissal. We've all known this for 30 years now, and yet we have to keep taking boundary training classes. So learning how to not be a racist, that's a lot more complicated than learning how to not have sex with your students. So yeah, regular continuing training has to be a part of the solution. Thirdly, a great deal of police work has to do with addiction, mental health, and domestic violence. Now, these are things which, when you add an armed policeman to dealing with someone who's high on drugs, or someone who is engaged in domestic violence, or who has a persistent and serious mental health issue, adding an armed policeman is more likely to make it worse than it is to make it better. We need to dramatically reduce armed police in traffic management, and we need to cut back on armed police and staff up on trained social workers who do know how to deal with mental health emergencies, addiction, and domestic disputes. I have never owned a gun, and I have gone into homes dealing with addiction, mental health crises, and domestic disputes for more than 40 years. Now, I've taken a couple of punches in my day. One that was quite memorable, and I'm not sure that my feelings aren't still loose, but I have never felt like I needed to shoot someone. Once I was actually held at gunpoint by an alcoholic in the middle of a domestic violence call for 5 hours. And I am alive to tell you about that because the police never showed up. If they had shown up, I am certain that I would be dead, the man's wife would be dead, and his mother would be dead. It was a traumatic event as it was, but I've been walking around able to tell this story for 35 years because no Barney Fife with a loaded gun showed up to nip it in the bud while we were trying to talk our way out of it. I get that there are circumstances that do call for an armed officer, and I want to know that they're available. Everybody doesn't, but I want to know that I have the option of calling an armed policeman when a situation demands that kind of policing. I'm just saying that we probably actually need about a fourth as many as we have. But we need a lot more social workers and people with mental health training to do what they are equipped to do. Our police have a bad habit of turning a minor traffic infraction into a fatal shooting. How many times does that have to happen before we recognize we don't need them out there doing this job? Their defense is almost always that they were following standard police procedures. And that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I submit, is the whole damn problem. Standard police procedures in the United States of America are militarized to the point of the police acting like they are an occupying force in a foreign country. They work for us. They are supposed to protect us. Our problem is that we don't have anyone to protect us from them. If the British can manage their population with 2, maybe 3 gun deaths per year, anytime the United States of America has more than 10, we should stop and reevaluate what we're doing wrong. Not 1,000, for goodness sakes, 1,000? By the way, we've had more than 200 since the end of March, and about 80% of them were non-white. So the problem is just getting worse. So you see, in just the first 2.5 months of the year, our police killed more people than British police have killed in the last 15 years. Do you see how dramatic this problem is in America? Now, the federal government can help with this reform in 2 ways. Number 1, stop giving military equipment to local law enforcement agencies and shift your federal grant money away from arming police towards mental health, addiction, and social workers. Local law enforcement agencies will hire the people they can pay for. This is not complicated economics. If the federal government gives them unrestrained block grants, they will hire and train more armed policemen. If they give them grants for addiction treatment and for social workers, that's who they'll hire. My 4th and final point, the Attorney General of the United States should have an office of review in every legal case where there has been a police killing, with special attention given to instances where the police officer that fired the gun was one race and the victim was another. Every judge and prosecutor should know that their work is being professionally scrutinized in a way where consequences for racist decisions are going to be severe. Folks, over my years, I've known a lot of judges and a lot of prosecuting attorneys, and they are no different from the rest of us. They are much more likely to do the right thing if there are serious consequences for doing the wrong thing. Judges are not demigods, no matter how much they act like it. They're like surgeons who couldn't get into medical school. I can't prove that last statement. I just know that it's true. I want to thank you for asking me how I thought we should approach police reform. This is not a comprehensive list, but I believe this is a vital starting place. Clearly, what we cannot do, folks, if you've tuned me out, tune me back in. What we cannot do is accept the status quo. We cannot just go on living with it the way it is. I beg of you, especially my white sisters and brothers, do not think of this as a black problem. It's not. Sure, most of the victims are black, but most of the shooters are white. This is mostly a white problem. We need to change. Black people have tried everything from absolute compliance to running for their lives. They've knelt, they've slept, they've demonstrated peacefully, and they've rioted. They've tried everything to avoid being victims. Now we need to try something, like changing, like not being so racist, and not burying our heads in the sand. All of this is, of course, just my opinion. But of course, you know in your hearts that I also happen to be right.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.